Hello and welcome to NARC Live on Wednesday the 20th of July 2022, coming to you live from Norfolk on the east coast of England with Tammy M0TC.
Hello.
And me, David G7ERP. Lovely to be with you. On tonight's show, how best to set up and configure popular logging program N1MM with Kevan N4XL. Amateur radio was really cool at Weeting Steam Rally last weekend. And we find out what on earth this is. And if you know and you haven't already, let us know. Pop it onto Facebook or BATC and we'll read your answer out when we read everybody else's guesses as well. But first, it's back to this last weekend and Weeting Steam Rally, which we'd advertised to you as something which happens just southwest of the county, really. And Andy M0NKR was an organiser of a stand representing Norfolk Amateur Radio Club and Amateur Radio. And he's written this short report for me, and we can show you a couple of pictures as well. So firstly, he says, well, what an awesome weekend. Great to be back amongst all the steam and dust which is Weeting Rally. It was good to showcase amateur radio to members of the public and advertise the show from the field using the call sign GB0WSR. We made contact with around 300 other amateurs around the world, including stations in Japan and America that now know of the show and what it's all about. Our station consisted of an ICOM 756 Pro 3 running 100 watts, and the antenna was a ground-mounted homebrew 20-metre vertical, which also worked quite well on other bands using the radio's built-in ATU. It was great to see local club members that came and gave us a look as well. And I wish to say from the club's point of view, thanks very much to Andy M0NKR, his XYL Laura M0LJD, to Bob G7JTZ and to Paul G3VPT, who manned the stand all that weekend and set up and packed up. So well done to you for helping put the club and the hobby on the map. I hope you had lots of fun as well. Certainly had the weather, didn't you? Now, for several weeks now, quite a few weeks, I've been promoting the National Hamfest coach trip, which I've organised for Friday the 14th of October. But I'm afraid, and we do need a minimum of 25 people to make the £35 cost, which includes entrance, make sense, be viable, basically. I'm afraid, although we've had a few in the last couple of days, we've only still had 17, which includes me. As such, I really don't think we can run it. I say that just because we are on the 11th of hour. I have given this as the deadline because on Friday the club has to pay the money to the coach company, not unreasonably, for them to fix and guarantee the availability of the coach and the price. So this is a last call, a very, very last call. If you would like to go to that, there are two pickup places in Norwich and both the east and the west. It's £35 per person, including entry. And the booking deadline is today. I guess I could accept an email tomorrow, but that has to be it because then I have to either tell the coach company regretfully we have to cancel or do it. Now, I think everything has been said by many others about COVID, but this is the first time we'll have had to cancel a trip, but I'm not altogether surprised because unlike previous times when I've organised this trip, there weren't the rush of people that there normally is, and I took the liberty of asking a few regulars, if you like, who would go on the coach why, and they all said COVID, both possibly because the coach might be quite full, although I think, you know, we'd planned on just half filling it really, but more importantly, the event itself was going to be probably quite a crowded hall. So I respect all of you. There's no, in my opinion, there's no right or wrong way of feeling about COVID, even now, even though we're in a warmer climate where there's less about. I know lots and lots of people, maybe you're the same, who've had it more recently, more than at any other time. So you're not wrong to feel that. Don't feel you've let us down. Yes, I did a few little bits of organising and booking, but it can all be undone now. But I think that unless I was to get a miraculous sort of 8 people in the next 24 hours, I'll have to cancel the trip, and I will write to everybody who has put their name down. It's not quite the end though, because if you are thinking still of going to the radio rally under your own steam with your own vehicle, and if you would be happy to car share, then I think the club has a role to play there, and we can certainly advertise that. And of course you can split the costs, which are not insignificant now with fuel, etc. as it is. So I'll be very happy to do that, probably a little bit nearer the time, because it's the middle of October that happens, and then we can be sure of people's availability. So I think it's going to be cancelled, but you may surprise me and we may suddenly get another 7 or 8 people put the name down. I have advertised it everywhere, by the way. It's been open to everybody. We put them on leaflets at Barford to everybody. We've contacted local clubs. I even offered to put an extra stop in at King's Lynn because we're sort of going that way. But as I said, it wasn't for want of trying, but I think we probably all understand anyway. Thank you those who supported it. Now, some pictures that Bob G6PWS sent us. We didn't have time to cover them last week, but we're glad to show them tonight. These are some pictures from his garden, I believe. So here are 2 pictures here, and this is lovely, isn't it, of Olive Oil. We rescued her from a drain where she was covered in oil, took her to the vets where they helped her to recover. Now, after 2 weeks at home with us where we have washed, cleaned and fed her, we're going to release her soon after the vet says she's okay to do so. I just love the little face in there, isn't it? Lovely. Also, this picture Bob sent us, this is a tree where he discovered some very strange goings on in the morning after a stormy night. Yes. I think that's good. Picture says 1,000 words, so I won't say any more there. And then this triple pictures of what our great nature enthusiasts might be able to identify. It stayed there for 2 days and then just went. Bob's wife has tried to find out but sadly failed. Someone did say, is it an elephant hawk moth? But others say no, as the hawk moth is more pinky and browny. So if you know what that is, and I know you're all radio experts out there, but if you know, if you've got a bit of nature about you as well and you have an idea what that one is, I must admit it looks big as well. I don't know how big that is, but anyway, if you know what that is, please drop us a line and we'll put we'll send that to Bob.
Just depends how big your TV is, doesn't it?
Well, that's true. Yes, if you're looking at it on a phone, it's quite small. Yeah. Thanks, Tammy. You made me feel really good then. Okay, and we just want to, and we're just going to also promote this. It's a radio rally coming up by fellow Norfolk Club King's Lynn on the 7th of August. I did mention this last week. There's all the details there. We'll also have this. We had a bit of trouble, to be honest, putting this in our newsletter last week with graphics and things, but I've managed to convert it into a form which you can see it. So I'll be putting all those details as well on the newsletter this weekend. It's not for a couple of weeks yet. Sunday the 7th of August. About two and a bit weeks, I guess. Now, looking back a few weeks, Radio by the Seaside at West Runton was Sunday week ago. And did you go? I don't know, a lot of you did. I think we had about 35, 40 cars or something like that. Now, if you did go, I don't know if you heard a droning noise. I thought I did, but then I thought, well, no, Tammy's not with me.
Funny.
So, anyway, if you did, that was James, M0UKS, who's got a completely licensed legal drone, and he took some footage of it. Let's have a look at it. Oh, this is a couple of stills actually as well.
He did one pass and then another, so this is the first.
I mean, that's after quite a few people had gone, because in between all those gaps, there were actually cars as well. I said there's about 34, I think, altogether, in the peak of the day. So let's have a look at the video.
It always amazes me how steady they are.
Yeah, they're for those of you interested, the good ones, and I know James, I won't mind me telling you, he has a good one. It's DJI, one of the leading manufacturers of that, and it's got a gimbal the camera's mounted on, which basically keeps the whole thing really stable. A bit like you have on cameras, I guess, you know, video camcorders and some phones. But it is incredible. I mean, those picture quality, and we're looking at here in a studio where we've got HD monitors and things, and it's getting close to broadcast quality, that. It would worry me if this was live, because I'd be thinking, is he going to lose control of the drone at this point? So if those of you who've never been there, that was at West Runton, North Norfolk. It's a traditional place that the club has gone for many, many years. And that was Radio by the Seaside a couple of Sundays ago, and I'm sure we'll do it again next year. Now, before we move on to little people, just going to tell you a bit about what's happening next week. I'll tell you a little bit more detail in a while, but also show you a video from last time, because it's just under a month ago, we had our what we call our friendly fox hunt. That's a direction finding competition, and the friendly one is a rehearsal, really, a test out of equipment. Well, we've got another one now. This is for next week, next Wednesday, and this is for the trophy. This is where they'll get awarded with an actual physical trophy, the winners, and they will also become the foxes next year. So last this we had, do we have 8 teams? The one we did a few weeks ago, I think it was 8 teams.
I don't think it was quite
was it
8. Was
six teams. And I know it's because one person was away, so we hope to have 6 or 7 teams. Anyway, I'm going to tell you a bit about that in the program details in a minute, but Bob and Mike, who are the foxes, they made this video showing where a few people didn't quite make it and quite see it, and also some people arriving, and so let's play this video now.
This is your fox hunt for tonight. This is the fox at its location, hidden in its little lair. Vulcan Airport. Vulcan. Next one is the Hoover Dam. Right next door at the village of Boulder. Gee, I had a steer fox for the fox hunt tonight. Right, 1 minute. For all those who must be bearing down on us, we should be seeing large numbers of vehicles traversing in our direction shortly. Hopefully. Unless of course you've all completely lost.
Hello.
Ah, we have a man.
How you doing? Hey.
Well, I thank you. You've got your mileage.
Yeah.
What's that, 9.8?
1.4. Hello boys.
Oh.
You look like a 4. Look at that, you got a nice little setup there with the old bird through line and everything.
Oh yeah, well at least we can tell how much power we're putting out.
Yeah, it's back.
Somebody walking away from the vehicle.
The Bitten Club has done it again.
I see.
The Bitteners arrive.
Yay!
Who's got the envelope?
He's now bringing it. Team Tornado.
Oh goody.
That's a bit rough.
We'll never quite know. Well, you're the,
Yeah, they come.
Sonny was the first.
Yeah. Well, Sonny's been, hasn't he?
Sonny's been and gone, got his fish and chips. Who's got the envelope?
Who's got the envelope?
Got some other teams, another 4 I gather. Oh, I do like the bike. Oh, that's nice. We seem to be inundated.
That's a hell of a bike, that is.
I
I think there were 7 teams
hope
set
you
off.
did you bring some fish and chips?
Right
Oh,
off.
that's a shame, isn't it? Here he comes.
Yay!
There you all are.
What you do is you
Hello!
Dear.
How was that then?
Well, we got
Easy.
here.
Not really.
We have got. Hey,
Well, actually, yeah.
another team.
Come the 2 teams.
Well, I think
We saw Bob and Paul going that way, back on Cromer Road.
Nice idea. Well done, everybody. Right to be here. Thank you most kindly. Yeah, thanks, Steve.
And
Thank you,
that's
Dave.
rain. That's a wrap, as they
That's a
say.
wrap.
That's a wrap, boy.
Yep.
Both
had the same training, I think.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. So that's what it's like to be at the Fox. In case you're wondering what I was doing there, normally I'm sort of meandering around, but I was actually driving for Tammy and Steph, their team. Foxy ladies, or what do we call it? Foxy folk, I think, because I was
Foxy
driving.
folk.
I was the honorary driver. Anyway, it's a lot of fun. It's probably getting a bit late if you haven't built equipment or anything like that for it. But if you do want to see what's going on, you will get an idea from what happens at the beginning of the evening. at the Thor Correction Ground, which is where they'll be starting from next Wednesday from 7 o'clock or just before. People will be arriving. It's free to park up, and you can just have a look at people's different types of equipment and get an idea of what's involved. If you have a team, there'll be usual rules apply. It's all on map 134, Ordnance Survey 134 as well. You need 2 people minimum in your team, obviously a good tank of fuel or a fully charged electric, and a charged mobile phone. They're the main rules as far as we're concerned. And one other thing, in case you haven't seen anything about this before, this isn't a race against time, because the winners will be the people who find the fox in the shortest distance. So we ask you to reset your trips, and then we do it on that basis. All right, so it's really good fun. If you fancy trying it or just seeing what's involved, then come along next Wednesday. And by the way, we did film a couple of the events last year. We did it live, actually. We did live broadcasts, but they were recorded, and they are on our YouTube channel, so you can check them out there.
Car Crash TV, that was.
Well, I don't know.
Me on my own in the studio.
It was difficult TV, wasn't it? But it was fun, and I mean, I think we both said actually it was the most challenging thing we've done. But you know what? A few people said it was so much fun. So yeah. I would brag. It sounds like we're bragging, but they did say, in fact, a couple of people said it was the most enjoyable one they've ever seen, NARC Live. So anyway, we didn't want to do it every time because I think it would tire them. But if we can think of a different angle one day, maybe we will. Anyway, Tammy, you've got some little people for us, I think.
I have, yep. Well, I found the little people this week. I saw this picture and it reminded me of if you played Mario, where you jumped and things came down. But I found it was actually a video. There's a video on this little people. It's like a stop motion video. And
is that a true genuine little people, or is that a different one?
No, that is true genuine little people.
Oh, wow. You haven't been looking at my searches, have you? I've been looking at audio mixes this week, actually. So yeah, I have. Wow. So there you go. That's really good. Thank you very much. So it's little people. Miniature-calendar.com will get you to that site, and Tammy chooses a different one for us every week. So what have you been doing? It will be a couple of weeks before we meet again, but we'd love to hear for your news. As you can see, the people who've sent us stuff, videos, news, whatever it is, as long as it's vaguely related to you as a member of the club or just radio related, and it'll be of interest to others, we will try and include it on the next NARC Live, which I said is in 2 weeks from tonight. Now, that competition that we run and fox some of you a lot of the time, it's what we call What on Earth Is This? And this is what we showed you last Wednesday and asked, what on earth is this? Now, we had a few answers. Have we ever got anybody answer this tonight? Had a go or not? I don't think we have. We have. By the way, I know this has got nothing to do with that picture, but we have got a message saying the moth, this is for Bob from Simon M0SIH, he says the moth is a poplar hawk moth. I guess that's right. Poplar hawk moth. Poplar as in tree, I guess. Yeah. Poplar hawk moth. So there we are. Thank you very much, Simon. Always a tree of wisdom for us. Let me just check that nobody else has answered any of the questions. I don't think so. No? Okay, so let's go through the answers then, what you entered in. Steve G3EVA said, is this week's object a MIG welding tip? Tom G8XQD says, is it a MIG or TIG welding wire in a holder, allowing metal to be added for very fine TIG welding? Nev M0NFY says, a wild guess, is it the business end of a MIG welder? Bob G6PWS, to me that looks very much like a welding or cutting torch. Looks like an old mechanical one to me. Normally the wire is motor fed, but this one looks like it's fed by hand. And Ken M0KJW says, is the mystery object a handle or gun for feeding welding wire? There's a theme going on here, isn't there? There is, but it's quite interesting, as you'll see when we reveal what on earth it was. You can see there the famous brand Heinz 57 look. Righty, so I think it's fair to say most people probably wouldn't have expected it to be quite that small. Anyway, this was sent to us by Mark M7LLS, and he said this: it's a holder for laser welder wire. The little rollers are used with a finger to feed the wire out of the end and into the area to be welded. As the wire can be as small as 0.15 millimeters in diameter, it's very tricky to hold by hand, and it's also not ideal to get your fingers near the laser's beam. Isn't that good? Wow. And so I think that's to do with injection moulding and things. To me, that looks like a mould tool where you get the reverse of something, if you have a look there. Yeah, probably injection moulded. The cap has that on, doesn't it? The white top cap on the ketchup. Yes, something like that. So that's lovely, Mark. Anyway, you foxed a lot of people, but although, to be fair, everybody was pretty close. If we were giving marks out, you'd have to give everybody at least half a mark.
I did say to you, actually, I don't normally know what things are, but I did say to you, is it some kind of welder?
Yeah,
no.
It's very good.
Do I get a mark as well then?
No, we're not allowed. All right, so thank you very much for that. Now, what have we got for you this week? You'll need to have a look at this because there are clues on the picture. Because we're going to show you, very unusually, we're just going to show you the inside view of a piece of equipment and ask you, what on earth is this? Now go back to your science days, you might get some clues from some of that and deduce what that on earth this is. I'm not going to say who sent it either because that might give you another clue. But there we are. It's going to be 2 weeks that we tell you that the answer is, but if you think you know what that is, don't delay. Send us an answer now to radio@dcpmicro.com. Do it by 3 o'clock on the Wednesday at the very latest, and we'll reveal that evening what on earth that is. Smiley face.
I'm smiling because I can hear through my headphones the bird outside because we've got the window open.
Yeah, we don't normally do that, as you can imagine, in this studio, but it's so flipping hot in it. It's 26.5, and I think that is quite warm to work in, sort of work. I mean, we call this work. So we did open the window a little bit before, but we can hear the lovely evening song in the evening. Anyway, before we go to our guest, let's just quickly tell you what's happening this week at Norfolk Amateur Radio Club. On Sunday at 7 o'clock, it's the GB2RS News on repeat at GB3NB. On Monday night, it's at 7:30, it's the Monday Night Net on GB3NB. And at 8:30, it's the 80-metre CW Net on 3.543 megahertz. I was getting that mixed up with the Kablenska. Anyway, and next Wednesday, the 27th of July, you've got two choices if you're a member of this club. You can either go to the meeting at CNS School, which will be a social informal between 7 and 9. Don't forget what we said about round tables as well. You can find details of that on our website. Drop Jim Bacon, G3YLA, a line if you'd like to see a round table discussion on something informal. Or the same night, but in a different place, at 7 o'clock, Thorpe Recreation Ground. Find yourselves there. You'll see what a fox hunt is all about, and hopefully lots of you will be entering your teams as well, because this is for the trophy. And of course, always, as always, please send us your news and views and pictures and videos and everything else to us at the usual address, radio@dcpmicro.com. And that's also where you should contact if you would like us to send one of these cards, one of these NARC greeting cards, to anybody at all for who's celebrating, maybe not feeling well, or anything like that. We're very, very happy to send a card on your behalf. Add your name to ours and we'll post it straight away. Now on to our main event. Now, most of us who do amateur radio, although we don't have to legally now log, we do log, partly obviously who are doing competitions and things, and also because we want to know and remember what we did and who we worked. Well, one of the most popular programs, at least, is N1MM. And with us to explain how best to set it up, some of the pitfalls and how we can best decide how to set it up and make the most of it, is Kevan N4XL. Hello, Kevin. Good to see you, but we haven't got any audio at the moment. I don't know if you're muted or possibly us.
I was muted. Is that better?
That's fine. That's all right. Yeah.
All righty.
Thank you.
Hello, and thanks again for inviting me to NARC. I'm glad to be here and share what a little bit of knowledge I have.
Yeah, well, we're looking forward to it. I mean, just before we talk shop, as it were, you're based in South Carolina, aren't you?
Yep, been here for about 20 years, 25 years.
Well, I don't know if the
First time I've ever set up a station with a tower or anything, so I've been enjoying it.
Well, I'm South Carolina is somewhere I don't think I've been. But pardon my ignorance about your climate and everything, but you may have seen on your news there that Britain has experienced the hottest day ever yesterday. Both England and Wales and Scotland, I believe, all in the last couple of days, our hottest days ever. We exceeded 40 degrees Celsius yesterday here in England. And I just wonder what the climate was there and whether you'd noticed it. Was it particularly getting hotter over there than what you'd expect for this time of year?
It is. I think climate change, at least short term, not to get into politics of who's causing it, but it definitely is having an effect Our temperatures are not quite as hot as yours lately. We are 35 Celsius, about that range today, maybe a little bit less. But we are going up to about, I'd say 37, 38 degrees by this weekend.
Wow. That is something. And I mean, I know from my visits to the States over the year, you've got a lot more air conditioning and things than we have. And certainly we're not used to that sort of thing over in England. But anyway, I digress. But I think it's just nice as we're talking to somebody who's over the water, as it were. It's just nice to sort of see how things are with you. But I'll hand it back to you, Kevan, as usual, for you at home watching. If you've got a question or a comment for Kevan at all, then put it onto Facebook or onto BATC, and we'll be happy to read them to Kevan at the end. But right now, back to Kevan to find out how to make the most of N1MM.
Well, I hope some people get some things out of this. I tend to get mixed reviews. Some people think there's a bit too much simplistic things in it, and others think it's a bit complicated, so I suppose I might have a mix fairly close in the center. But N1MM is a specialized program for contesting in particular. We do, it can be used for general logging, but it's predominantly a contesting only program. And what this is from is my learning experiences as I began to use N1M for contesting. So there's little things I picked up and made note of as I went through my learning curve for it. And there's also questions that people have asked me. Now, one thing that might be a little bit difficult if you are not familiar with N1MM is this is predominantly set up assuming you are familiar with the program a little bit to start with. And if not, there may be a few things here that'll give you an insight as to what the program's capable of somewhat, and some of the things that can be adjusted to it. Some people are considering whether to move to this from something else, so maybe they'll trip a trigger for you a little bit. So you are going to have to be a little familiar with it. And I'm primarily a CW and sideband operator, so there's minimal information on digital, although we'll get a little bit in here on it. With that, one thing I wanted to mention is everybody wonders why there's not a cheat sheet for this particular program. And we'll go through this pretty quick. Every station is different. You've got different operating systems. Some radios have LPT connections, other USB. They all have different command codes and different COM port settings for them. Flex radios are popular here in the US. I'm not sure about over there, but sometimes their codes conflict with the N1MM programming codes. Some people use single operator 2 radio or 2 VFOs. And devices share multiple resources. People who use different modes may have a different interface unit for it. Single operator 2 radio, I have automatic antenna and filter switching taking place, so I have to incorporate N1MM and all in that as it works. Some people have add-in sound cards. Other people use SDRs right out of their radio or an add-in unit. And many of us use USB distribution hubs now, and their camera sharing the resources, etc. And there are also operating choices. Do you want to operate a FSK or AFSK RIDI? Some of us, instead of using the straight filter on a N1MM, use an add-on program like CC User. And then there are multi-op remote or distributed multi-operation units. So how can you write a cheat sheet for this particular program? There's just too many variables for station to station to make that happen. So you kind of got to dig into this and learn a little bit on your own to make the program work right. We'll start out kind of simple a little bit. I didn't realize this when I first started. N1MM is loaded, I'm assuming Windows here for everybody, in the program files directory, but all the software, setup files and other things that you use are actually kept under your documents in the N1MM logger portion of it. And if you run digital engines like MMTTY, two-tone FL Digi, you ought to keep them outside of your documents folder and outside of the programs folder, and people usually put under in the root C drive and then reference them from there. So that may save you a little bit when you go to load these things and set them up. There are files specific to contest, each contest, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel each time. You can save macros and WAV files to automate your process for about every program that's out there. There are call history files, which if you're contesting, it'll look up the exchange that the person last used and load it in if you tell the program to do that. And you can export the files for Log of the World or other general logging programs. I mentioned at the beginning, N1MM is not a general logger. So if you use it in a contest or something, you usually export an ADIF file and then load it into your general logging program. But we'll talk about another neat trick of that a little bit later on. And although there are a couple hundred contests set up by N1MM, you can set up a user-defined contest too, and the instructions tell you how to move that into your system. One thing, some of us contest using different call signs. I often use Whiskey Japan 4X-ray, for example, and they recommend you set up a separate database for each call sign you use. It helps keep things separate and works well for that. In the program, you can, when you set up the station, you tell it what your call sign is, and then some of the macro commands like mycall or asterisk, if you throw them in the macro sheets, it'll look at that call sign you put in saying the station is WJ4X or N4XL, and it'll load that call sign in it. So if you have a separate database for each one, you don't have to worry about having the wrong call sign each time. This one's kind of neat. Multiple INI files can be used because there are all kinds of windows, different kinds of windows that can be used for N1MM. You can open them and close them and move them around. We'll get a couple pictures of that later. But a CW layout might be different than a sideband layout, might be different than a RIDI layout. So you can save them once you get them set up in the Windows diagrams that you like, and they tell you how to do that under their ham docs. Save it as a configuration in any file, and then you can, every time you bring up a CW contest or an FT8 contest, it'll bring up the window configuration that you like. So a lot of this as we go through, I'm not necessarily going to tell you how to do it, but at least make you aware that that possibility is there. One thing that keeps cropping up over and over in the reflectors on N1MM is people trying to put things up on Microsoft's OneDrive. And Microsoft loves for you to do that, but you need to kind of override that a little bit and don't let them store the files up there. People have lost their entire databases because they've been corrupted by syncing issues back and forth is one of the more drastic things that can happen if you allow that. So don't let it put your files up on OneDrive if you can avoid it. This is the Windows section in the Documents part of N1MM. And there are many different things here that you can use. Your call history files go in there. You can record all your contesting and put it in the QSO recording. All your WAV files, if you want to have your computer send audio things for you, goes under the WAV section right here. And you can export files, all those different things. But the ones that are really interesting I wanted to talk about are these ones down here. A lot of times, for some reason or another, all of a sudden people will say my program was working yesterday, and all of a sudden today it did an update, and now it's not working anymore. Or I don't know, I changed something, I forgot what it was. These programs down here, it keeps a week of them in this documents file. In this main one here, N1MM logger ini, that's what it reads. But if all of a sudden it stops working, you can go back and rename one of these to the N1MM logger ini. And the last time, it was working on Saturday, you can pull that one back in and rename it. And that saved me and several of my friends many times by just reconfiguring it and then picking up from there. Kind of useful. The configure has many different programs or many different options to do. This is where you set up your radios. This was set up for an SO2R, which right now I don't have that, but you set up your radios and their configurations here. 15 and 16 was what I was using for RIDI. 20 and 21, I have some foot switches that'll cause N1MM to do some things. And this 11 and 12 were the micro ham interfaces that I had. And let's take a look at this radio setup, for example, over here. This screen comes up, and most people can figure out how to set their radio speed, 57.6, N81, whatever it is. It goes up to, I think, over 100,000 speed-wise, so you can get them pretty quick. Most radios don't use handshake, so you can look it up and see what your particular settings is. The one thing that always confused me for a long time was, what are these buttons used for? I was fortunate, and I did kind of get a cheat sheet for the microham equipment, and it said make sure these things were not checked. So normally you don't want to check those things and leave them unchecked. We'll talk about an exception in a minute. This right here, if you have like a foot switch and you click it, if you have that box checked, it'll bring the focus back to the window, in this case the entry window if it's a foot switch, just by clicking the foot switch. So that's a good thing to have. This one here enables both hardware and software push-to-talk. Your software programs can generate a push-to-talk signal to your rig, but some of the hardware does too, like Microham will generate that. And on the N1MM reflector, they said it's not a good idea to have that checked because sometimes the two software and hardware will fight each other, and you end up causing your rig to hang up in a transmit mode, which is not a good thing to have happen. So unless you need it, you don't really need to check any of those particular devices. Now, one guy asked a question on the reflector. He said, I've got a IC746 Pro using a signal link USB, and it says, so far I've not been able to get the signal link to key up the rig. He says the signal link and red light comes on, but nothing happens to the rig. And the answer was, this is a case when you would want to use those push-to-talk commands. And since the signal link uses a SSB or USB mode normally, you would check that because the signal link is not generating a hardware code. So you want a software code from N1MM to send it to the rig and cause it to key. And a friend of mine, Bill, N4IQ, lives a bit north of me, said FLDigi is another similar program where you want to use that particular checkbox. So normally you don't want them checked, but let the hardware handle it. But if the hardware doesn't, that's when you check the push-to-talk box. This right here was the foot switch control I was talking about. And they've got a little drop-down arrow that you can pull down. And you can select any of these, ESM enter, typing focus. Being single operator 2 radio, sometimes I'd be listening to the other radio while I was calling CQ on one, and I'd hear something on the other radio that I wanted to respond to, so instead of the keyboard having to get my fingers wrenched into a thing, I set it up for switch radios. Or you can have it send the F4 or any of the F key messages, whatever. So that's how you would set that up. I had to have DTR always on and RTS off. And then just pop the foot switch and it makes that stuff happen. The foot switch does require an LPT port. And I'm not associated with EdgePort, but several people in some of the other videos I watched or presentations suggested this was a good little box. And it has a USB connection and then 8 LPT ports. I found one on eBay for like 60 bucks, I think it was, shipped, and connected in there. And it's worked very well. I've had no problems whatsoever. So if you got devices that need an LPT port, you can set it up with USB, and the EdgePort program will allow you to assign COM ports to any one of these. And it's pretty transparent. It works real fine with Windows, should you need any of that type of operation. Ham docks. Your friend is going to be the Ham docks program, which is the online software user manual for N1MM. And one thing I had is I went up and I started looking at my particular radio when I set it up. And you can do that. You go down and there are IC7300s or TS590s or whatever radio, just about all of them that are out there, modern radios. They've got instructions which tell you how to set it up. And there's a couple pages of the information, that stuff there. It's online. This I have in a PDF on my computer, so I don't have to be connected to the internet to read it. And I set it up and things didn't work right. And it kind of confused me a little bit. Well, there's another thing too. Just because it talks about an IC7300, they've got a separate section for ICOMs, which is general ICOM information, which talks about things for all ICOMs. So not only do you got to check your particular radio, you ought to look at the one for your brand of radio as well. And then they've also got general information for all radios, which gives you information like DTR and RTS. If you're doing a handshake, it'd be always on. All kinds of useful information in there. And then if you searched for like IC 7300, I found information on IC 7300 down here in the IC 705 section, talking about how to set up voice messages and everything too. So you can do a search of this stuff as well. And in another place, they mentioned that for AFSK, an IC 7300 would use AFSK reverse. And that really kind of confused things a little bit. And then also there's the spectrum display, a whole different section about how to set up an IC 7300 for using a spectrum display. So I got frustrated when I first started setting up my radios because I'd read the section on the radio and it wouldn't work, and I'd go online and Reflector and either ask a question or find something there. And then I finally figured out about it. I had to go through and look in all these different places to get the program to work. So just something to think about if you're setting it up and with your particular radio. And that's what we just talked about there. This thing here talks about under the configurer and in the function keys, several different things. I like to use this. If you're contesting and you type in somebody's call wrong and you correct it, they send you a corrected call and you change it in your entry window, having that checked will send their corrected call to make sure they got it before you move on to the next particular person. In this case, I set up for an automatic CQ, and the CQ is going away, and I may get distracted by something else in the shack. And if somebody starts talking to me, I reach over, and as soon as I hit like the first letter G4 or something on the keyboard, it'll automatically stop sending CQ, so I can start trying to copy their call sign. Any contester ought to know that it's usually quicker just to work dupes when you're running, rather than argue back and forth. I worked you, no you didn't, I worked you on such and such a time. So just go ahead and work dupes, check that box, and usually you get them out much quicker. A lot of people like to use a CW contest word spacing. I did for a long time. And what that does is it actually saves you like a couple tenths of a second is all when you're sending a short message. But people like to use that. But there's a problem. The N4ZR, our reverse beacon network, RBN guru, says that can screw up the algorithms of the skimmers that are spotting you in Morse code because of the uneven word spacing. It's not a standard. So it's recommended now that you don't use that particular box. I've unchecked it in my other one now. These ones down at the bottom, in the program, each F key does certain things by default. CQ is F1, F3, what you send your thank you message, F4 is your call. And if you don't like them, you can change them to be whatever you want. The problem is if somebody, if ever comes and uses your shack, they're probably used to the standard numbers and it'll confuse them. Or if a lot of times you can have an N1MM download a particular macro file for you that's already been set up by somebody else. And in most cases, just about all cases, it'll be using these standard definitions. So if you do that, it'll no longer work correctly. And there's a thing in there called enter sends message, which I'm not going to get into too much here. But the program's set up so that all you do is after you get to a certain point in your exchange, you hit enter, and it'll send the next message. And it really does tend to speed things up, but it takes a little practice is all. This one confused me for a long time. In the configure again, there's a section called mode control. And if you use assistance, or you just turn your VFO from place to place sometimes, but assistance is the one that bit me multiple times, is I'd click on a spot, and somebody who put the spot in had their radio in a different mode than I was operating in. So just by clicking on a spot, it would sometimes change the mode on my rig a little bit. Or as you're tuning across the band, there are these divisions between CW and sideband. As you go across, it would automatically change the mode for you so that I wasn't in the CW down there in a mixed mode contest and all of a sudden to jump up to a spot for upper sideband. I'd make a jump and I might stay in CW if I had it always just whatever radio mode it was in. So I often change that and use contest or radio mode, unless it's a single contest, band contest, then I'll just keep it in one or the other. That's the one I was talking about. Always use packet spot mode. If you check that, it'll change on you all the time. This in the configure, you can have your program broadcast data out over your network, and whatever box you check there, it'll send that information out to whatever port you use. And it's possible, like I like the general logging program log for OM, it's possible I can have log for OM open at the same time as N1MM, and by checking those particular blocks right there, and there's a little link, you can feed this information to log for OM, your general logging program, at the same time, or DX log or whatever other ones you want to use. So as you make an entry into N1MM, it'll automatically feed your general logging program, which then can be a real-time log around the internet or whatever. So that's a useful feature to have. And you also use this particular thing for networking to other computers and whatnot. We'll talk about in a second. And one thing about this is if you have a slower computer, the more items you select, the more time it takes for processor time. And it's recommended if you've got a slower computer or something logged down with a bunch of stuff that you minimize how many of them boxes you had checked. Because it can cause delays and stuttering in your program. Now this morning I got in my email a question, which I can't see the top of it here, but basically I think it was I use N1MM on 3 different computers, and I got Telnet connected on one PC, but can't see how to pass all the Telnet messages over the network. And Alan, G8 Oscar sent that in. And I don't do much networking. I have done a multi one, so I reached out to a friend of mine. His name's Ron, WV4P, Whiskey Victor 4 Papa, and he does a lot of distributed work and has people call into him a lot. And off the Windows section of N1MM is this network window. And what he said is you pull this network window up, and in the network window you have to designate a master, and the other one, if it's not checked, is automatically a slave. And the master is the one that you connect to the telnet, and it'll go ahead and send the information to all the slaves that are connected to it. Telnet must be open on every single machine, but it's getting its telnet feed from the master instead of from each individual line. So that makes it well, and you can still do all the individual filtering on each machine as such. And on the master, you have to make sure you're not filtering out the spots the other machines need. Like the master in this case is set up for 10 meters. If the master has a filter so that it's saying only give me 10 meter spots, none of those spots are going to appear to the station that's trying to work 40 meters, since this is the master sending spots to everybody. So that caused some consternation for a few people. Maybe that's what's going on as well. And Alan, if you're listening, I forwarded Ron's email to David, G7URP, and hopefully he'll forward it on to you. And that has Ron's email address in it. And Ron said, feel free to contact him, and he'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Now, one thing I will note is I did a Canada Day contest with Ron as the distributed multi. He's in Tennessee. I'm down here in South Carolina. And one thing I found out, I was running Norton, and Norton does not like playing with the program that he was using for his distributed multi. So that may be another issue that's going on, is the computer firewalls are preventing the network communications from taking place as well. So just something to consider. And again, Ron will be happy to work with you, Alan, if you get hold of him. This is under the configuration section of N1MM. All these different choices are made in there. I like to use enter send message. By having this one checked, as you dial off your frequency, so any entry you had in the entry window. I'm a low power station. I can't work everybody I hear, so if I tried a couple calls and didn't get them by tuning off, it'll put them in the man map for me. That doesn't make me assisted, by the way. It just, because I found the station, it's just like jotting his call down on a piece of paper. but then I can use the band map to come back and find them later on. I don't, because I do a lot of S&P operation being a little guy. I don't like to have the radio automatically switch to CQ when I tune back across the last frequency I CQ'd on. So there are all these different options that are in there as well. And the one I wanted to talk to was this, logger audio setup. One of the things that tends to bite people is they use the single sound card that they have in their computer. If they have multiple sound cards, they set it as default. And if you do that, any sounds you have from Windows are going to automatically be transmitted over your radio, because it'll treat it just like a transmission, a wave file transmission or something from your computer. So they recommended you don't use default. There are other ways you can assign the sound cards to it. And the other thing that tends to happen is sometimes if you plug in another device or whatnot that has a sound associated with it, it'll automatically reassign the default sound card to it. Like if I plugged in a phone or something, or an external headphones like I'm talking on now, USB headphones, it'll sometimes automatically become the default. And then N1MM is trying to send sound to the default, which it's sending it to your headphones instead of your radio. So that thing can bite you in the butt a little bit. And also there's a nagging problem that when Windows does updates, sometimes it redefines these on you all the time. So it's always a good idea before a contest, as part of your pre-contest checklist, to make sure your sound tracks are going where they're supposed to be going. And there is a possibility or the capability in Windows of defining what sound path N1MM should be using. You can do that under the advanced functions of your sound program. So here's a picture of what the sound things are and how you can tell if which one's set up for default device or whatever. I use this Zonar. This is an old copy, but I use a Zonar sound card as my normal path to send things from Windows to my microham devices in TS590. Don't know how many of you like to use the real-time scoreboards, but it's a great way to give motivation. And if you're working at a club or whatnot, you can set up clubs in there and see how the other members of your club are doing. So I really like to use this. It's a good thing to do. It keeps you from being quite so isolated sitting in your chair. It'll push you a little bit sometimes to stay a little bit longer and get a little bit higher score. And score distributor server, there are two main ones out there that people use. By checking distributor server, it sends it to both, and report real-time score server. If you don't want people to know what band you're on, because you can click that and exclude your band breakdown, that gives you a little bit of edge without telling your competition exactly where you are and what you're doing. So you can do that as well. COM ports. This isn't strictly N1MM, but let's talk a little bit about it because it causes a ton of problems with people here. If you look in Device Manager Windows, you normally see something that looks like this right here. And this is old hat to a lot of people, but for some it's new. But if you show hidden devices, you can see this one that's grayed out down here. It's not active, so it didn't show up on that particular list when I said show me COM ports. And I've got a microham virtual serial port generator. I tried to assign COM5 and it wouldn't let me do it. So I went looking, and sure enough, something I had plugged in, I think this was for a Yaesu FT8800 programming cable, had taken over COM5. So I couldn't set it up in there. And these can cause you a lot of problems, these hidden COM ports. You normally want to get rid of them. Here's another example I pulled off the internet. This guy took a picture of his system, and he's got the orange ones, 2 COM3s, 2 COM4s, and those things can cause you a world of problems trying to set up your computer ports and everything, or if something activates while you're in the middle of a contest. So you normally want to get rid of these hidden things, and there's several instructions out there about how to do that. I used to just take and delete them, but some of the recommendations by the people that really know says don't just click and delete it. If the driver for that particular port is something that you're not using, you ought to remove the driver too, because even though you remove the COM port, the driver itself is still loaded in your system and can cause future problems. So if it's not a shared driver, get rid of it at the same time you get rid of your COM port. This has caused a lot of people problems. By default, Windows loves to turn things off and save power. and does it on its own without you telling it. It's best to uncheck that box and not let it turn your in this case, that's my TS590 off because it thinks I'm not using it in the middle of a contest. Under the advanced settings, down here at the bottom are several different things. I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer on that. By default, I think this is left selected, selective suspend, and it'll do an idle timeout if it doesn't have any signal in such and such a time. Best to uncheck that box. And this one, I always wondered what that was, so I looked it up on the internet. And if that one's normally not checked, the disable mode and control. But that's what causes when you reboot your computer, your radio or your other things to cycle on and off. It sends a, it thinks it's an old back 1990s or whatever modem, and it sends signals onto the COM ports to check to see if there's a modem there. And that causes a lot of your equipment in your shack to cycle. So I disabled that. I don't get near as many of those random startup things in the shack anymore. For port settings, again, pretty simple for whatever your radio is. I will mention for a TS590, and there may be others out there, the radio in this has to match, but you can change it in your TS590 menu system, and you think you've got them matched, but the TS590 actually has to be powered off for the menu change you make to take effect. So several times I've not been thinking clearly and made a change in the TS590 manual to match N1MM, and things didn't work, and it took me a while to remember, oh yeah, I got to power off the rig. And that's not just turn it off, it's you got to remove DC power completely and have it reread everything from the rig. So little things like that can bite you. Adding to the joys of life, COM port numbers are not static, and most of us who do Windows know that quite well. Usually after Windows Update, COM port numbers change by themselves, and because you've delineated a COM port in N1MM, N1MM didn't change, but now the COM ports for your devices and those numbers have changed, and they no longer match up, and all of a sudden nothing works. Again, why it's a good idea maybe to disable Windows Updates, particularly in the middle of a contest, but also a few days ahead of time. So once you get set up, it won't update on you and screw you up again. And things no longer work. MMTTY also has COM port numbers and everything else. Here's some advice off the reflector about COM ports, and I found this pretty useful. A lot of the COM port problems turn out to be good old RFI. And so what they say is follow all the advice about eliminating RFI, because it can go shooting right down your USB cables right into the radio. And do not unplug the USB cables and reinsert them when a virtual COM port has stopped working. What that'll do is, most cases, renumber the COM port. Instead, they tell you to reboot the computer, and they redirect you back up to maybe it's RFI and study that as well. Unplugging a virtual COM port cable and inserting into another jack will likely renumber the virtual port as well. So if you got like a USB port, a different thing, and you unplug it and you got 3 or 4 wires dangling down, you just pick them up and reinsert them back in, and you get the wrong jack, things may have renumbered. Now you got all kinds of hidden COM ports in there. Which is why it's a good idea to periodically go in, I do every month or two, and see if I've got any hidden COM ports. And some virtual COM port drivers allow you to fix a COM port to a specific port. Silicon Labs does that. My TS590s use a Silicon Labs driver, and they're always COM3 or COM4 for me. And if you're using powered USB hubs, do not remove the hub power after the computer is powered up. It can be a source of changing virtual COM ports. And letting your computer go to sleep while your rig's on, like you got N1MM or something else connected up to it, and you go into hibernate or sleep. When it restarts up, it might renumber all your COM ports on you as well. And when you're done operating, it's best to shut down the programs that access the COM ports, because you don't want Windows doing an update, because if Windows does an update while you got your COM ports open, it'll renumber them as well too most of the time, give you some bad problems. If you use N1MM Lite, you got a lot of these windows, and I promised you'd see some of the windows in the future. Sometimes it's hard to remember where your focus is, and you try to do something and your focus is in the wrong place. So real quick, take a quick glance at this picture and tell me which window has focus. Pretty easy for me. That red just leaps out at me, which is why I did it for my contesting. And you can do that in Windows. I chose a red color under themes. I took off the transparency effect and I said have that bright red affect title bars and window borders. And that made that nice and bright for my use. So real quick to figure out what window has focus and whether you're doing the right thing or not. Especially after 20 some hours and you're starting to get real tired, it's hard to keep track for me sometimes. Wow. We all like spectrum displays, but this is the N1MM spectrum display and it's a mess. I'm not going to go into how to use this. I did that in another presentation. Matter of fact, I think I gave it to you guys, but I'm not sure about that. But there's a lot of information here that can be used. These little red dots mean things. This blue line means something. The gray means I've worked those stations already, but it's hard to tell which signal is which. When I'm contesting, a guy looked at this, my friend Bill, N4IQ, and he says, I don't like that. He wants to use some of the other programs like SDR Play and some of the other screens that come with that. He used that for a long time. Once I started to talk to him about how this particular screen is integrated with the molten Q window and how you can jump from red dot to red dot stations you haven't worked and skip over the ones you have worked and things, gave him the presentation. He said, I kind of like that idea. And he changed his mind after learning how it was integrated, and now he's a big proponent of using this type of N1MM Windows too. And you can take this window and set it up vertically, which makes it easier to see. But I prefer it this way. I don't normally look at that, what the calls are anyway. I just use jump from call to call and spot to spot. Spectrum display. Some people have some problems with this. There's a whole section in the N1MM manual that talks about it. And the old advice was to use the I/O with external I/O DLL files for best performance, but that was causing a lot of problems and taking up a lot of processor speed. So Tom and them created a program called N1MM SDR server, and that's now what they want you to accept. And this is a window that comes off of the Spectrum display window. And you check that box, and SDR server is loaded with N1MM. So you've already got it on your program. Read up about it in the manual, and you use that. And another thing that pops up is all these displays, how many times it scans and uses the frequencies in there can slow your computer down. So he puts information out about it. He says it's a good idea for a starting point, set your frequency bins to 16384 and your display bins to 1024, and that works for most everybody's computer. And then depending upon your resource loading and all, you may be able to increase that and get some more finer resolution. So he talks about that in the manual too, I think it is. At least it's on the reflector if it's not in the manual. All right. He also had some examples about RIDI in the manual. He said if you're using a sound card or codec, all the sample rates must match. Check your receive and playback transmit paths. Have the same bit rate, sample rates going on. And if multiple decoders are used, like some people like to use MMTTY along with a second decoder from two-tone and maybe a third from gritty, they all need to have the same sample rate set in there or they don't work together. So that's something good to check. We'll take a look at that in a second. I think I put that in here. If you don't, your tones generated as the standard tones for RIDI can actually be at lower pitches. And I didn't know that when I first set up RIDI. I've done a couple RIDI contests. And first time I set it up, people said they couldn't copy. My tones were off and they couldn't figure out what was going on. And I found out that I was not using the same sample rate of them, different things. With narrow filters, also, your bandpass may appear at the wrong place in the waterfall. And in AFSK, the logged and spotted frequencies may be listed incorrectly. You have your sample rates wrong. And this is the sound card things, and this is looking at my zoner card. And it said I've got 2-channel 44-100 sample rate being used on it right there. But then if I look at that sample rate here, and this is an MMTTY screen, this is not the same, but as long as it's a multiple, like this is exactly 4 times, it's supposed to work. But if I had this set at 12,000, or if that was set at like 48,000, it might not work correctly and exactly. So those are the types of things that you're looking for with that. Make sure everything's the same as you go through. And since you're going to have problems with N1MMs, particularly since Windows is involved, document everything after you get it working correctly. I like to use this method for most of mine. I take screenshots of everything, what I have selected, what my things are, and I put it in a binder over there. I've changed everything around, and I don't have it working right yet. So what I have over there is foobar. But I'll get it documented again and move out. My friend Bill, he uses this handmade drawing. He has skimmers in his shack, and he operates amplifiers, which require some specialized interfaces that he built himself and all that. So he uses this particular documentation. But whatever you use, you ought to document how you had your station set up. It'll save you a lot of trouble as you get going. Under the export section, and this is the N1MM entry window down here under File, Export ADF to File, you can do it from all contests. So I'll typically do a few contests or whatnot, or general logging, and then I will export everything out of the contests that I've done as a group and put it up on Log of the World, or I can do that and move it into my general logging program from the last time I did anything. So those options are available there. I also have what I call a sandbox or test database where I set things up. And then once I get it running, I can copy this contest to my main contest database and move it over there. Or take something that I did last time I did a CQ Worldwide WPX, for example, and move it into my test database and play with it. It's already got pre-populated call signs and everything in it. So that's a good thing to move back and forth and play with. And I did the Michigan QSO party one time, and there wasn't a call history file for it, so I played around. I took the Michigan QSO party log from the previous year, and I exported everybody's call, and I made my own call history file. So you can do that stuff from there as well. Let's talk a minute or two about WAV files. Do not record compressed audio and feed it through the compressor a second time. First time I started working with WAV files, I did that. I used the sound path. I would feed through a processor in my radio, fed the Windows program through the transmit monitor, so I had compressed audio going out the transmit monitor, and then I put it into a WAV file, got the WAV file set up, and then when I played it back through the transmitter, I still had the compressor on, so I double compressed it. Didn't sound all that good, so be careful about it, how you do that. Now I use an outboard processor, W2AHY, and it pretty well removed all those problems for me as well. Another great thing is Audacity. There are different programs to work with your WAV files, but if you haven't tried Audacity, it's pretty going to do it. And a lot of times, like I just paused right there, if you record a message, you'll get these pauses and it won't sound correct. So you can use Audacity to trim off all your files and get it so you just have the information rather than the pauses in between. And then you also have the capability in Audacity of, instead of some of them being quiet like that and others going real like that, it'll normalize them and play them all pretty much at the same volume level. And some people, like I've got a problem, some words I just talk really low on, parts of words. You can grab just a small part of a word and amplify that small portion so that it all sounds normal. And it sounds better if you're going to do these, what I typically do with the WAV files, and I've talked about this in another program, I think, is I will record all my numbers at the same time. I'll count 0, 1, 2, 3, and I'll go all the way through the numbers, and I'll actually go past them into 10 and 11, keeping my voice as even as I can and the same all the way through. And then I'll grab out the small individual number and process it and save as an individual number. And that has worked well for me, making sure everything sounds about the same. Because otherwise, if you record 1, and then you get that one all set up, and then you go 2 a couple minutes later, you may have a completely different inflection in your voice, different volume, whatever. So that helps keep the things all sounding normal in a WAV file playback. I hate people that sound like robots coming back over their WAV files in the program. You can do this for letters as well, A, B, C, D, E. I personally don't do that. I'll voice a call sign. Works well for me, and then I'll use the WAV files to play back the number exchange or the other exchange information. I do well with that. But I do know a man, NS3T, Jamie. He had some problems with it. He used to be a broadcast engineer, audio engineer, and he lost his voice. He'd do a lot of interviews, but he had a disease, and something happened, and he lost his vocal cords. But he had thousands of hours of recorded interviews. So he pulled words out of his interviews, and he's converted them into WAV files. And if you ever hear NS3T doing a sideband contest, Jamie's using old recorded interview files to generate everything on his computer. And it sounds pretty good, pretty reasonable. So it takes a lot of work to get the letters and things correct, but you can do it. Recording should sound the same as a live microphone. Some people, for example, to use an extreme, would have an XYL record their voice, and then when it comes back for the exchange, a guy may be the operator now and be answering the exchange. Well, it causes confusion on the other end. Am I talking to the same person? Or just radically different sounds between two men, as the case may be. So it's best to have your sounds be the same. And you can record audio files for each operator and then use a command op on, and it'll go to the WAV file program for that operator who's recorded his own recordings, and everything will sound the same. And again, use the same sample and bit rate for all your audio files. We said that for the earlier stuff with the RTTY stuff, but it's true for sound as well, because as it goes through the sound chain in different parts of your computer, if it changes from like 11 kilohertz up to, I don't know what the other are, 8 kilohertz, or up and down, back and forth, it causes some delay, because your sound card component has to change over to the new sample rate, and or in some cases where you're trying to play back recorded messages, it'll freeze up and it won't convert at all. It'll just be a blank sound. So it's best to keep all your audio files in the same format, and that's fairly easy to check. Concatenate. We're going to talk about that, but it's a fancy word that basically says before N1MM plays back your message, like if you're using it to play back a number 345, it'll load 3 file, 4 file, 5 file before it even starts playing the first one. And that eliminates a lot of the delays that happen between numbers. Hopefully we'll get to hear that if my audio is working correctly through the thing. This is what Audacity looks like when you record a number. This is number 1. I recorded it, and by the time I hit the stop button, I had all this space at the end. So I trimmed it, cut off the spaces on each side, and then look at the height here between the top and the bottom, the center line and the top of that, compared to the height there. I normalized it all up to -8 dB. So every number I recorded should be at that particular peak at -8 dB. Now, if I vary the tone, like I say, then if I'm recording a number and 1 is loud and then 2 is a little bit quieter, the peaks are all a little bit different. So it's best if you can have your tone be the same as recording it. Because if you look at this one, when I said the number 3, I got that peak there. If I don't trim it and I normalizes it to 8 dB, that peak will be at -8 dB, and all these will be much, much quieter. In this case, I knocked off that peak by using Audacity. I reduced it way down. And once I got everything, that peak to be there, it no longer will be an outlier when I go to normalize it. Everything came back about the same volume for the number 3. And let's give a couple audio stream examples. Let me close out of this a minute and open up N1MM. Now, I haven't put numbers in here. I've just recorded some things individually to make this go a little bit quicker. Here are some unedited numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can hear how they're a little bit different. Now, because I'm so used to talking at the same volume when I do this, it all is kind of the same volume. But there were spaces between those numbers. Here I edited them out. I'll play the unedited and then the edited. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that makes it much more palatable on the other end by doing that particular thing. There's not a lot of difference, again, because I'm practiced with it between this and the normalized, but here's the edited and the normalized. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can hear that it's a little bit more even, and the bigger the difference, the better off it is. Now, I talked about concatenate, and we'll go up here into this logger audio setup, and here it says concatenate before playing. Now listen to this when I close it out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Much quicker. 1, 2, 3, 4. Much smoother. 1, 2, 3, 4. It almost sounds like a person. So with a little bit of work, you can get this sounding fairly acceptable for playing back number wave files, or you could even do calls, respond to calls using that particular format as well. And the last thing, I know we've been going here a while, the last thing I'll talk about is my own personal preference. I use a gaming keyboard with macro keys off to the side to perform N1MM functions. And then I got this thing over here I'll talk about in a second. And what this does is N1MM has all kinds of shortcuts. Like you can hit Control up arrow and it'll jump to the next spot in the spectrum display window. Or Control U if you're in a contest that does serial numbers. If you don't get through the first time, I will type in the number he gave the station before me, like 432. And if I don't get through, I'd have to type in 433 again. But if I hit Control U, N1MM will automatically increment the number by 1. I program those different shortcuts that I use all the time and assign them to these keys to the left of my keyboard. And rather than twisting my hand in a knot doing a shortcut, I'll just pop that key. Now that might not sound like a big deal to y'all to remember to hit Control U to increment a number, but after a 30-hour test where I've been doing that, sitting in the chair for 30 some hours, my hands started getting pretty sore. So a gaming keyboard has saved me a lot of effort. And I use color codings for common things like white or exchange information for me. Green is yes, roger, 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 or thank you type of things. So I use that type of coding. A lot of people lay things over. I use little Avery labels that I make up for each contest and paint them on there. Don't have to change many of them because they go redundant. Now this thing is actually a touchscreen tablet. And if you've been following the N1MM Reflector, they talk about a program called Touch Portal a little bit. And instead of hitting these keys right here, I program commands in radio commands and N1MM commands. So all I got to do is reach over and tap this button on this touch screen, which is right there next to the keyboard, and it'll do things for me. On the band map now, I think you can get like 36 of these different buttons up here at the top. Now, y'all may not have all these, but you can program and set up your own buttons on the inside of these. And you do that by displaying setting them up, and then putting, in this case, rather than using N1MM commands, I've got CW1, for example. If I click that button, it'll send that CAT command to my TS590, my radio 1, and set my filter at 400. It'll set my filter at 200. It'll change to wide sideband IF or narrow sideband IF, or turn the receiver on and off, preamp on and off. All those commands by clicking on that mouse button. But I don't like moving my focus around on the keyboard, and that's where Touch Portal comes in. It's this program which I think you can download it for free, and it's kind of limited, but for $12 for a lifetime license to it, you can download Teleportal, and with a touchtop or touchscreen laptop or Android phone, or in this case I bought a little tablet, you can tell Touch Portal, set all these keys up on the screen and just reach over and tap them. So preamp on, off, attenuator, receiver, and I can reach over on the radio to do that. But some of the buttons on my radio are double purpose buttons. Like my receive antenna is the same button as my attenuator, and I found myself screwing up, not holding the button in long enough, for holding it in too long. It messes things up. So this avoids that problem, and it's really easy to do with that touch panel sitting right there next to the keyboard. So that's pretty much all I had. Some references and help sites. Hopefully it gave you some ideas and things. There are 800 and some pages in the manual, so there's no way I can cover everything for everybody. It's just too complicated of a program, but hopefully it gave you some ideas and things that might allow you to continue on.
Indeed, Kevin. Could I ask you just to make that, that's it, bigger. I was just going to ask for that, if you could make that. Could you just go back to the previous slide, just so that people can quickly have a look at that? That looks a bit bigger then. Not that one, no, the one with all the references on it. That's it. That's lovely, thank you. Just so that people can make a note of any of those. Yeah. And if you missed those, of course, this program is recorded and you'll be able to watch that back on the YouTube channel in the next couple of days. So there's some useful stuff there. Thank you, Kevin. I must admit, I don't use it hardly ever, and so just being honest, and I can't believe there's so much to that program, and it's free, isn't it?
Yes, it's completely free. The program is developed and operated by hams themselves, and a team mostly of retired folks that do that. A lot of them have computer backgrounds, obviously, and they have boards to request changes or whenever things pop up, and they usually respond right in the middle of the contest if there's something significant and major.
Wow, that is, you can't get better service than that, can you? You wouldn't get that sort of service with a paid-for program. We've had a question from Ralph 2M0RHT, actually right at the beginning, so I think I know what the answer is going to be for this, but he has asked, will N1MM work on a Mac? Do you know?
I know people that are running it on a Mac using the programs that emulate Windows, but I can't discuss what the problems are or not because I don't use that particular function. The N1MM reflector is a searchable reflector, and you can go to the archives and it'll give you a search screen, and you could type in Mac or Macintosh and give you a wealth of information, I'm sure, or just post a question to the group itself. Yeah,
sure. I mean, you can run Macs in a thing called Boot Camp, which basically is where you reboot the Mac and you run the whole thing in a true version of Windows. And there's other programs, as you say, like Parallels and things, which will do it. So the answers may be, Ralph, and probably best to check out with N1MM if you don't already have those programs, in case, you know, before you actually spend money on something like that, to see if it works. Thank you for the question, though. Got some good news from Alan G800, who says, thanks, Kevin. I've Telnet now working on all networked PCs. So you and your friend, between you, you've got him working on all of his computers in his shack.
Fantastic.
So that's really good. Question from Roger G3LDI. I presume you could use a Stream Deck instead of an iPad and program the buttons on there.
If it's Android, the answer is yes. It needs Android.
Okay, we happen to know what a Stream Deck is because it's used by all sorts of people, television industry, which is how we use it sometimes. It's basically, I'll just explain, it's a box that looks a little bit like what you had on your tablet, but it's real buttons. I don't know if we can show this. Can we tell me? We've got to be careful not to put us off air here. We use one sometimes for programs, so I'm just going to show this up to... If you're a gamer, you may have come across this. If you're in the television industry or anything like that, it's actually really clever. And what I'm sure this will interest our radio amateurs at home is that each of those buttons, you can just see, I don't know which mode we're on. We've got zoom, view and mute on this one at the moment, but these are LCD screens. Each one of those is a miniature LCD screen and button, and you can make it a shortcut, and it's supported by many programs. So if you're on a program which supports shortcuts, you can program these basically with software that Elgato, who make this, use, and you can reconfigure it. So you can make the screen, the button, look exactly what it is. And it's really remarkable for television, I can tell you, where you can program lots of shortcuts. When we're running complicated Zoom calls here for things like the RSGB annual general meeting and things which we hosted, it's really useful to be able to set that up and call it. Anyway, what I think Roger is asking, would you think that might work if it replicates shortcuts with the program?
the touch portal only works on an Android device, so it probably won't work with that particular one. However, I show this to you as working for a contesting program, how it interfaces with N1MM. It can do anything that Windows does, basically. You can set up scripts so it will do multiple sequential things. I select my antennas not by using N1MM commands, but by moving my mouse to the place I have my antenna window to and clicking on a button, and Touch Portal records that, and that's how it moves. Or I use Amazon Music. I set it up rather than a little mouse clicks on a little button. I've got touch buttons on my screen whenever I play music, so I can skip a track or volume up, down. Basically anything that Windows does, you can do with Touch Portal, but I don't think it'll run on that particular device if it's not Android.
But my hunch, just my hunch now, Roger, so this is not with any authority, if N1MM has got lots of shortcuts, you could probably use a Stream Deck because you emulate the shortcuts on the Stream Deck. But anyway, if you've already got one, at least it's something that you could try. That's all the questions we've got at the moment on that. One thing I was going to ask, one thing I thought was really telling is something that years ago in the early days of USB, it was something the opposite of what you would do, and that is you said that you had to switch off all power from some of the devices before you set them up or before you delete a virtual port and things. And in the early days of USB, I remember Windows 95, if you remember that as well, you have to be very careful about disconnecting anything at all, and that seems like this needs the opposite. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Sorry, it's okay. I thought I might have pressed the button on the Stream Deck and actually disconnected you.
I hate to say this, but I thought you were making a particular comment rather than a question, so I didn't.
No, well, not really. It was just a fascinating fact, I think, that was, and actually, if I may, it's true that you have highlighted many of the things that people just wouldn't have found by playing around with it. I think most radio amateurs, I'm sure, like many human beings, like to play with things without reading the manual. That's my experience anyway.
Absolutely.
Some of these things you just wouldn't find out that way.
Okay, this is in Touch Portal itself, and it shows some of the programs. You can do any of these things, navigate, mouse clicks, bring up files, open files, close files. And what I wanted to do is go back here a minute and show like this right here, the preamp. That what it does is simulates, once I'm in N1MM, the key combination Control-Alt-Shift-3. So if your other program, Stream Deck, uses combinations like that, it would probably work just fine for you.
Yeah, well, I think it does from what our experience is. So it's a probably yes, Roger, I think. So. Kevan, it's been another fascinating evening with you, and I think this, although it may not have sounded probably the most exciting thing to people, if you've ever tried to get this program working, I know that the club, when we've met, and we'll obviously just start a meeting again, it's been one of the subjects that people have often had the most problem with, is setting up the logging software, and of course it's so important, especially for contesting. So it's really useful. I'm sure this will act as a reference for people if they haven't even watched every detail tonight. If they go to set up N1MM, I'm sure this is going to be a really useful reference for them in the future. And once again, Kevan, it's really good of you to come and give the talk, and we hope to see you again.
Thank you very much, Roger. Or David, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Thank you very much. And hope the weather continues to be nice, but maybe not too hot, just like it is here.
That's true.
Take care. Thank you very much, Kevan.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. There we are, and we'll be seeing Kevan actually for another talk later in the year. I believe November, I think, is when we've got scheduled in. So thank you very much to him for tonight, and thanks for you for watching and for your questions as well. Oh, we've just lost as well. I've just got a question that, sorry, it was just a bit too late. Ray has sent a question. I'll tell you what I'll do, Ray. We'll copy that and we'll send it to Kevan and try and get an answer for you. I'll just read it for everybody's sake at home. On Facebook, Ray's watching. Can Kevan explain again how he highlighted in red the window in focus? I found themes okay, but not sure how you do the focus. I'm afraid Kevan has actually literally gone. Sometimes our guests stay a little while, but he has actually gone now. But I will get that question to him, Ray. So thanks to all of you for your questions tonight. Just to go over again what's happening this coming week at NARC. Sunday, GB2RS News on GB3MB at 7 o'clock. On Monday, the Monday Night Net, also on GB3MB at 7:30. The 80 meter CW net on 3.543 megahertz at 8:30. And then next Wednesday, remember, it's a choice of two things. We're not meeting here online. You can either go to the CNS school for a social meeting there, or you can go to the Thought Recreation Ground. Just Google it if you want to know where it is. From about 7 o'clock, when all of the fox hunters will be meeting there to go in for the trophy contest for the fox hunt for this year. That's really looking forward to. And I will just give you a sneak preview as well. In 2 weeks' time, when we meet back here, we'll be meeting Eric Schwartz, who's the CEO and founder of Ellicraft. So we really look forward to that as well. But that's it, I think, from us for now. So until we meet again in 2 weeks, and maybe see some of you next week for the fox hunt, from Tammy M0TC.
Bye-bye.
And from me, David G70RP. Take care of yourselves, look after each other. Bye-bye.